A human voice calls from a starless ocean world. The deep space survey vessel Luminous picks up the distress signal, a crackle of pure desperation from an exoplanet designated Abyssus. Its sun has gone dark. Captain Aris Thorn makes the only choice he can, ordering an immediate descent into the unknown. He reminds his crew they are the only ship in range and that the signal is unmistakably human. By answering this call, you will discover the terrifying price of bringing light back to a universe that has learned to live without it. What awaits them is not just an alien sea, but an entire ecosystem that has evolved to consume energy, where the only glimmers come from failing ship lights and the eerie, hungry glow of creatures far below. What would you be willing to sacrifice to keep a single light from going out forever? The descent was a plunge into oblivion. The Luminous tore through the upper atmosphere, a fragile sliver of metal and light, only to be swallowed whole by a shroud of permanent cloud. External cameras showed nothing, not the faintest hint of a horizon, not a single photon of reflected starlight. It was a visual void so complete the ship's own floodlights seemed to be consumed inches from the hull. On the bridge, Navigator Kale's voice was tight, each word measured against the groaning strain of the ship's frame. Atmospheric pressure readings are spiking into the crushing range. It is like diving into a gas giant, and my star maps, Captain, they are registering pure nonsense. The gravitational profile, the magnetic fields, none of it aligns with any known planetary model. This world, by every law of physics we understand, should not exist. As if in response to the declaration, the Luminous shuddered violently. A deep, resonant boom echoed through the decks, the sound of reality itself pushing back. Alarms blared as stabilizers failed. Captain Thorn gripped his console, his knuckles white. He had no visual reference, no landmarks, only the plummeting altimeter and the violent tremors shaking his ship apart. The choice was no choice at all. "Brace for impact," he shouted over the din. "We are going down hard." The landing was not a landing at all, it was a capture. The ship slammed into a surface with the consistency of thick, freezing oil, the impact throwing everyone forward. For a long, terrifying moment, there was only silence, broken by the creak of settling metal and the frantic beeping of damaged systems. They were down, but they were not on solid ground. External sensors confirmed it. The Luminous was listing slightly, held in the embrace of a viscous, pitch-black sea. Outside the viewports was a darkness so absolute it felt like a physical substance pressing against the glass. Then, through the static of damaged comms, the final loop of the distress signal played one more time, clearer now, as if its source was terrifyingly close. The voice was ragged, breathless, a raw scrape of sound against the silence. "The light is life," it gasped. Do not let it go out." The transmission ended with a final, hollow crackle, leaving the crew of the Luminous adrift in an impossible ocean, with only a dying plea as their compass. What do you do when your only instruction is to protect something you cannot even see? The silence was broken by the hum of emergency power. Captain Thorn ordered the external lamps activated, a desperate attempt to carve a bubble of reality from the dark. Brilliant white beams stabbed into the abyss, and for the first time they saw their prison. The water was not black, but a deep, translucent violet, thick as syrup. And in that sudden illumination, movement, monstrous pale shapes like skinned whales and eyeless eels the size of shuttles, darted away from the invasive glare, their forms blurring into the gloom the instant the light touched them. It was not a retreat from a predator, but a recoil from pain. On the science deck, biologist Dr. Ilara Vance had already drawn a sample from an external port. She stared at a scanner, her face illuminated by its cold blue glow. Her voice, usually so steady, came out as a trembling whisper over the shipwide calm. "Captain, this is not just water. Its viscosity, its chemical composition, it's a nutrient-rich synaptic fluid, and it is carrying faint bioelectric signals." A constant whispering chatter. This entire ocean is a living, thinking membrane. Before anyone could process her words, the Luminous groaned, tilting sharply to port. On the main viewer, something enormous drifted into the edge of the light. A colossal, translucent leviathan, its body a gelatinous sac through which they could see the ghostly outlines of organs that glowed with a soft, pulsing internal light. It moved with impossible slowness, brushing against the hull in a gesture that felt less like an impact and more like a blind, curious nuzzle. Then every light on the bridge flickered. A wave of cold washed through the deck. Engineer Rourke slammed his hand on the engineering console, his shout cutting through the stunned silence. It's not attacking. It's feeding. It's drawn to our power signature, our heat, our light. We are not a ship down here, Captain. We are a meal. The creature outside pulsed brighter for a moment, as if savoring the taste, and the ship's internal lights dimmed another fraction. What do you do when the very environment sees your existence as a source of sustenance? A cold dread settled over the bridge, deeper than the chill from outside. Engineer Rourke's diagnosis was a death sentence. They were a beacon in a world that consumed beacons. Every system, every light, every breath of warmth was a leak of precious energy into a hungry void. Captain Thorne forced his mind to focus on the mission, the distress signal. We are not here to study the local wildlife, he said, his voice cutting through the fear. We are here to find the source of that transmission, run a full spectral scan, look for any energy signature that does not belong to this place. The order was a gamble, using more power they could not spare, but it was their only thread. The scanner swept the abyssal plain below them, its active pulse feeling like a shout in a silent cathedral. For long minutes, there was nothing but the chaotic, whispering bioelectric noise of the ocean itself. Then a sharp, angular return appeared on the navigational grid. A structure. It was buried under sediment a full kilometer below their precarious position, but its outline was unmistakably human, a geometric scar on an organic world. Identification tags flickered on the screen. Colonial Science Module Aegir Registry Ganymede Outpost, listed as lost with all hands 73 years ago. The crew stared. This was not a recent castaway. This was a ghost. Thorne made his decision instantly. Suit up, we are going down there. The dive was a descent into a different kind of pressure. Their reinforced pressure suits were miniature ships, armed with painfully bright headlamps that seemed to push the viscous darkness back only a few precious meters. Outside the glowing orbs of their lights, things moved. Silhouettes brushed against them, not with aggression, but with a terrifying, investigative curiosity, each touch sending a shiver of cold through their suit systems as power levels ticked down infinitesimally. They reached the seabed, a landscape of rolling, fleshy mounds and towering spires of bioluminescent coral that dimmed as they approached, and there it was. The Aegir was a tomb. It lay half-buried, its hull cracked open like an egg, but the breach was sealed from the inside by a strange, fibrous growth that pulsed with a faint gray light. Thorne led the way inside, his beam illuminating a scene of perfect, frozen abandonment. Chairs were pushed back from tables, data slates lay scattered. A pot of synthetic coffee sat cold on a heating plate. It was as if every single person had simply stood up and walked out into the ocean at the same moment. In the command pod, a single screen glowed with a persistent low-power error message. Thorne touched it, and a log entry began to play. The voice was calm, professional, and utterly shattered. Final log, Aegir Science Lead. The dark tide is rising. Our attempts to communicate were a mistake. We thought we found a neural network, a planetary consciousness. We were wrong. It is a reflex, a hunger. It followed the light back to its source, us. Our only chance was to sever the connection, to cut the umbral cord it had woven to our reactor. We succeeded. The voice broke, a sob barely contained, but the cost was the sun. The transmission ended. As the last word echoed in the dead module, Thorne felt his suit light flicker. He looked at his team and saw their helmet beams dim in unison, as if the very memory of the log had drawn the darkness closer. They had found their answer, and it was a warning written in the extinction of a star. What do you do with a truth that extinguishes your own light? The data crystal was a sliver of cold glass in Ilara's trembling hand. She slotted it into her suit's portable reader, its pale blue light a defiant spark in the command pod's gloom. The files that bloomed were not just logs, they were a confession. Schematics, biological models, energy flow diagrams all painted a picture of breathtaking, tragic ambition. Her voice came through the team's comms, hushed with a kind of horrified awe. I understand now, the Umbral Cord. It was not a metaphor. She pulled up a visualization. Imagine the entire planetary ocean, not as water, but as a circulatory system. But instead of blood, it carried light. Bioluminescent organisms, from the microscopic to the leviathans we saw, were linked in a symbiotic network. They acted like living photovoltaic cells, absorbing the faint, diffuse radiation from their red dwarf sun and converting it into chemical energy. This energy was then shared, traded, circulated through the fluid like a currency. The entire world ran on a slow, steady, photosynthetic economy. The colonists of the Aegea, they found this network. They saw it as the ultimate power source, a self-repairing, planet-spanning battery. Her voice tightened, so they tried to plug in. They built an induction array, a massive device designed to siphon energy directly from the cord to power their module indefinitely. It was an act of supreme arrogance. They thought they were tapping a river, but a river does not feel the bucket. The cord did. Ilara zoomed in on the critical data. The moment they activated the array, they did not just draw power. They created a short circuit in a planetary nervous system. The feedback surge was catastrophic. It overloaded and burned out the primary bioluminescent organisms at the network's core, the equivalent of severing a spinal cord. The sharing of energy stopped. The economy collapsed, and in doing so, she said, her words dropping to a whisper, they did not just kill the light, they made the planet hungry. The entire ecosystem, every creature in this sea, had evolved for millions of years with the promise of that shared energy. Suddenly, the account was empty. The cord went dark and a deep biological starvation set in. The organisms adapted with terrifying speed, their evolutionary programming screaming one directive: find energy, consume it at any cost. They became hunters of photons, of heat, of any electromagnetic signature. They followed the only light left back to its source, the Aegea's reactor, weaving their own desperate parasitic connections to it, the very umbral cords the log mentioned. And when the colonists finally severed that last terrible link to save themselves, the starving network did the only thing it could: it reached further. It followed the ultimate energy signature back up the chain to the sun itself. As Ilara spoke her final, damning conclusion, a deep, resonant shiver passed through the seabed. Outside the cracked viewport of the Aegea, the brilliant beams of their two dive pods, their only lifeline back to the Luminous, flickered once, twice, and then died completely. Not a dimming, not a fade, but a total, instantaneous snap into nothingness. The blackness that rushed in was absolute, a physical weight, a suffocating blanket that erased the world. In the perfect silence of their helmets, broken only by the ragged sound of their own breathing, they were no longer explorers in the dark. They were the next meal on the menu for a starved world. How do you run from a predator when the very act of moving is a beacon? The silence in their helmets was a roar. Captain Thorn could hear his own heartbeat, a frantic drum against the crushing dark. Then a crackle, not from the dead dive pods, but from the suit's own backup comm, a faint thread of signal reaching down from the Luminous high above. Engineer Rourke's voice was strained, thin with static. Captain, we are reading a massive power draw from your location. What is happening down there? Before Thorn could answer, the channel flooded with a wave of dissonant noise, 100 overlapping whispers of static, and then a voice cut through. It was not the desperate plea of the original distress call. This one was calm, clear, and utterly alien, synthesized from the chaos of the ocean's own bioelectric chatter. "You are using the last light," it stated, without urgency or malice. "You will be assimilated to preserve it." The transmission ended as abruptly as it began. On the bridge of the Luminous, comms officer Jin recoiled from her panel as if shocked. She had isolated the signal, tracing its origin not to a point but to the entire surrounding sea. "Sir, it is coming from everywhere. The ocean is talking to us, and it just stated its intentions." A moment later, the main lighting on the bridge dipped violently, casting long, shuddering shadows. Every console screen flickered. From engineering, Rourke's shout was pure alarm. "Captain Thorne, get back here now. The primary power core just dropped to 10%. It is not a leak, it is not a failure. Something is physically draining us, pulling energy right through the hull. It is like the ocean itself is a siphon." On the seabed, Thorne understood. Their dive lights, their suit systems, their very presence was a concentrated pocket of energy in a starved system. The ocean was not attacking. It was performing an emergency triage. It had found a failing cell, their ship, and was attempting to absorb its remaining energy to redistribute, to keep the total light of the world from hitting zero. The voice's promise of assimilation was not a threat. It was a biological imperative. To preserve the light, you must become part of the darkness. Thorne made the only choice left. He opened a channel to the Luminous, his voice cutting through the rising panic. "Rourke, listen to me. Initiate a full systems shutdown, everything non-essential. Life support to minimum, all external emissions, all internal lighting except for emergency beacons. Do it now. We have to disappear." The protest was immediate, but Thorne overrode it. "We are a beacon in a world that eats beacons. The only way to survive is to stop shining." On the Luminous, Rourke's hands flew across the engineering console with a mechanic's grim resignation. With a series of deep, groaning thuds, the great ship began to power down. The hum of the engines faded into silence. The bright white glow of the external lamps winked out one by one. The interior lights dimmed to a faint, blood-red gloom, casting the corridors in the eerie light of a dying ember. The ship went dark and quiet, a metal corpse adrift in a hungry sea. In that new, profound silence, they could feel it, a slight lessening of the cold seep through the hull, a subtle easing of the drain on the power core. The ocean, momentarily confused by the vanishing of its feast, shifted its attention elsewhere. They had played dead, and for now it had worked, but they were now trapped in a freezing, lightless coffin, with a power reserve ticking down toward absolute zero. How long can you hold your breath in the dark before the darkness decides you are no longer alive? The silence aboard the Luminous was a living thing, a thick and watchful quiet. Power was a memory, heat a luxury. Yet on the science deck, Ilara Vance stared at her passive scanners, which drank almost nothing, and saw a ghost in the machine. A pattern. She called Thorne over, her voice a hushed breath in the red gloom. "Captain, look, the ocean floor near the Aegir, it is not uniform. There is a conductivity trail, a path of minerals with residual charge. And something else, faint thermal echoes spaced like footsteps leading away from the module and into the deeper trench. It is as if someone or something walked away from that disaster and left a fading imprint on the world itself." Thorne made a decision. They would follow the ghost. A second dive was insanity, a reckless expenditure of their dwindling suit power, but the alternative was to wait in the dark for their own light to fade. He took Kale and Ilara. This time, they used only the lowest setting on their helmet lamps, a dim, narrow beam that felt like a whisper compared to their previous shout. They moved like shadows, kicking off from the seabed in slow, careful arcs, and then Ilara saw it, a faint blue-green pulse in the murk ahead, like a dormant firefly stirred by their passage. She drifted toward it, her light brushing over a fan of crystalline coral. At the touch of her beam, the structure ignited, not with a flash, but with a slow, waking glow that traveled along its branches, connecting to a nearby fungal mound which also began to pulse with soft light. It was a chain reaction. As they moved forward with exquisite slowness, their minuscule presence acted like a key. Dormant bioluminescent flora awoke along a specific, winding path, creating a faint, ethereal road through the abyss. It was a breadcrumb trail of light, laid down millions of years ago and waiting for the right spark. The path led them over a ridge, and what they saw on the other side stole the breath from their lungs. A city, it sprawled across the ocean floor, not built of stone or metal but grown. Towers of spiraling, iridescent chitin rose like giant seashells. Arches of woven, glowing kelp spanned vast avenues. Structures pulsed with slow, internal rhythms, their light a deep, sleeping purple. It was breathtaking, organic, and utterly still. Kale hovered beside Thorn, his navigator's mind seeing not architecture but infrastructure. His whisper was filled with awe and dread. "Captain, it is not ruins. Look at the energy flow patterns, the way the light connects every structure back to that central spire. This entire civilization is a living battery in standby mode. It is waiting for a charge." As he spoke, the shadows within the city's arches seemed to thicken. Figures detached from the gloom, stepping into the faint glow of the awakened path. They were humanoid in shape, but composed of what looked like condensed black water, their surfaces swirling with faint, captured motes of light like distant stars. They did not approach with menace, but with a stillness that was more unnerving than any attack. Then one figure stepped forward directly into their pooled light. It did not have a face, but its form rippled, and a sound emerged, not from a mouth, but from the water around them. It was a chorus, 100 whispering voices layered into one resonant statement that vibrated in their bones. "You carry the seed of the old light. You must reignite the heart." The words hung in the water, a command that was also a plea, an invitation that felt like a sentence. The shadowy figure extended a hand, not of flesh but of liquid darkness, pointing toward the city's central, dormant spire. In that moment, Thorn understood the true scale of their choice. They were not rescuers, they were a match brought to the fuse of a slumbering world. The Custodians' gesture was not a request, it was gravity. Captain Thorn, Ilara, and Kale followed the liquid shadow being through the silent avenues of the sunken city, their dim suit lights the only moving points in a vast, sleeping cathedral. The path sloped downward, leading them into a cavern so immense their beams could not find its ceiling. In the center of that colossal space, it waited. The heart of Abyssus was not a machine, it was a geological organ. A titanic, multifaceted crystal, easily the size of the Luminous, rose from the cavern floor. Its surfaces should have blazed with captured starlight, but they were dark, a deep obsidian black, and running through its core was a single, jagged fracture, a scar of absolute nothingness. The Custodian flowed to a stop before it, its form rippling with what could only be interpreted as profound grief. The chorus voice echoed in the water around them. This was the converter, the nexus where the light of the sky became the life of the deep. Your kin sought to take its power. They broke the cycle. Ilara drifted closer, her scanner humming softly. She saw it then, the truth laid bare in the crystal's geometry and the residual energy signatures clinging to the fracture like a phantom limb. Her breath caught. "Captain, it is all connected. This crystal, it is a natural quantum resonator. It did not just distribute the sun's energy through the Umbral Cord, it amplified it. It tuned the faint radiation into a spectrum the entire biosphere could use." She pointed a trembling glove at the blackened scar. The colonists' induction array, it did not siphon power. It created a sympathetic resonance with the heart, but at a catastrophic frequency. It was like shouting into a fragile glass. The feedback loop shattered its tuning capacity. The amplification reversed. Instead of giving light, it began to pull it, and it pulled from the strongest source in the system. Thorn's blood ran cold. The star, it consumed its own sun's light. The Custodians' form solidified, its star-mote eyes fixing on them. The dark tide is not a creature. It is the hunger of a world whose heart has stopped beating. It is the reflex of every cell, from the largest leviathan to the smallest spore, seeking to restart the cycle by any means. It gestured to the dark, fractured crystal. Without a new light source of sufficient purity to catalyze the heart, to heal the fracture and begin the song again, the tide will continue to consume. It will drain every spark, every jewel, every whisper of heat. It has already tasted your ship. It will not stop until your vessel and you are cold and silent. The warning hung in the water, a final, terrible equation. They were not just visitors to a dead world. They were being offered as the sacrificial spark to restart a god's heart. And if they refused, they would be consumed anyway. The only choice left was what kind of fuel they would be. The heart's mandate was a cage with no door. Back aboard the dying Luminous, the cold was no longer just a temperature. It was a presence seeping into their bones from the metal walls. In the dim red emergency lighting, the crew gathered on the bridge, the ghostly city and its fractured crystal displayed on the main viewer. Captain Thorn laid out the Custodians' ultimatum. "We need to catalyze the heart with a pure, high-energy source," he said, his voice flat. "Something powerful enough to shock a planetary organ back to life. Our ship's reactor does not have the output, and even if it did, the transfer would kill our power long before it reached the crystal." Engineer Rourke had been silent, staring at a schematic of the ship's most damaged system. He looked up, his face etched with a terrible, clear-eyed resolve. "There is one source," he said quietly, "the quantum drive. It is damaged, leaking chronon particles. It is a cascading failure waiting to happen. But if we deliberately overload it, if we channel the entire remaining reactor output into forcing a catastrophic containment breach," his words hung in the frigid air, "it would create a localized quantum singularity event. For a fraction of a second, we would generate a miniature, artificial star, a flash of creation energy, pure and undiluted." The silence that followed was absolute. Then Thorn was on his feet, the horror of it breaking through his command calm. "That blast will vaporize the ship and everyone on it. It is not a plan, Rourke, it is a funeral pyre. We came here to save a life, not to commit collective suicide." The argument was a raw, human crackle in the mechanical gloom. "What is the point of saving a world if we are not here to see it? We could try to transmit the data, send a probe, anything but this." Before Rourke could counter, comms officer Jin, who had been replaying the original distress signal on a loop, suddenly held up a hand. Her eyes were wide, fixed on her console. "Wait, Captain, listen." She did something to the audio file, reversing the final, desperate plea. The garbled static resolved, the words playing backward in a hollow, synthesized whisper. "The light is life. Do not let it go out." Reversed, it became something else entirely. A calm, deliberate statement layered beneath the panic like a foundation stone. "One light must die to birth the dawn." The bridge froze. The message had been there all along, a final instruction from the Aegir's crew, buried in their own cry for help. They had not been begging for rescue. They had been issuing a warning and passing a torch. The colonists had understood the price. They had tried to find another way and failed. Their final act was to encode the only solution they could see into the very signal that would lure the next spark to this dark world. One light must die to birth the dawn. The phrase echoed in the silent bridge, no longer a mystery but a verdict. They were not castaways, they were the chosen kindling. The debate was over. The only question left was who would strike the match. Fear is a cold that no life support can chase away. It gathered in the dimmed mess hall, a place of shadows and whispered calculations where the recycled air tasted of desperation. The crew huddled over lukewarm ration packs, their faces drawn in the sickly red glow of the emergency strips. The plan was madness, a suicide pact dressed up as salvation, and it was fraying their nerves to breaking point. Navigator Kale, usually the calmest of them all, finally snapped. He stood so suddenly his chair clattered to the deck, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silence. His eyes were wide, white-rimmed, fixed on nothing. "We are not fuel," he shouted, his voice cracking. "We are people. This is not our world to save." He pointed a trembling finger toward the hangar bay. "The shuttle has enough power for one jump, just one. We could make it to the system's edge, send a distress buoy, wait for a real fleet." His words tumbled out, a frantic torrent. "This planet is a tomb, and you are asking us to lie down in it." Before anyone could react, he was moving, shoving past a stunned engineer, sprinting for the corridor that led to the hangar. The action broke the spell of grim acceptance. Shouts erupted. Thorn was on his feet, moving with a weary, decisive speed. He intercepted Kale at the bulkhead door, not with a tackle, but with a solid, unyielding grip on his arm, forcing him to a halt. The two men stood locked in the crimson gloom, one trembling with panic, the other rigid with a terrible certainty. "Running just delays the inevitable," Thorn said, his voice low and cold as the void outside. His words were not angry but final, a statement of physical law. "Every second the shuttle's engines burn, it bleeds light into this sea. We would be a moving feast, Kale." A last bright spark for the tide to chase down and extinguish. He leaned closer, his gaze holding the navigators. "Our light is the only currency here, and we are spending it fast. Fleeing just means we die exhausted, alone, and in the dark, having changed nothing. Here, our light can mean something more than just our own survival." Kale's defiance crumbled into ragged sobs, the fight draining out of him. He wasn't afraid of death, they all realized. He was terrified of meaningless darkness, of being consumed without a trace. Thorn's words, harsh as they were, offered a terrible kind of solace, a purpose. The silent crew watched, and in that moment, the last flicker of dissent guttered out. The shared dread crystallized into a shared resolve. There would be no more debate, no more fantasies of escape. They were the crew of the Luminous, and they would see their final duty through, not as victims, but as the authors of their own eclipse. The question was no longer if they would do it, but how they would ensure their single, brilliant flash was enough to wake a sleeping god. The work was a kind of sacred blasphemy. In the cavernous main engineering bay, lit only by the sickly green glow of bioluminescent algae they had carefully scooped from the seabed, Engineer Rourke and his team performed open-heart surgery on a dying starship. Their tools were spread across makeshift workbenches, each movement deliberate and slow, as if a single sudden sound could bring the hungry dark crashing down upon them. Rourke's hands moved inside the quantum drive's access panel, rerouting power conduits with a surgeon's precision, his face illuminated from below by the eerie algae light. He didn't look up as he spoke, his voice a low mutter meant for the machine itself. "The core is unstable. We are bypassing every safety protocol, every failsafe. One wrong calculation in the magnetic containment sequence, one voltage spike, and we implode early. We would not even see the tide coming." The statement hung in the cold, damp air, not as a complaint, but as a simple fact of their new reality. They were not fixing the drive, they were turning it into the universe's most precise and powerful bomb, with themselves at the very center. On the bridge, the external sensors told a different, more visceral story. The passive scanners, running on a trickle of power, painted a horrifying image on the main viewer. The dark tide was no longer an abstract concept, it had become visible. A vast, swirling vortex of absolute blackness was forming in the ocean around them, a whirlpool of nothingness that blotted out the faint, sleeping glow of the distant city. It moved with a terrible, slow purpose, a hurricane of anti-light. It was not made of water, but of the organisms themselves, billions upon billions of them, drawn into a coordinated frenzy by the Luminous' last, stubborn emissions of heat and residual power. They were a single, coalescing hunger, and the ship was the last crumb on an empty plate. Captain Thorne watched the screen, his jaw set. He opened a channel to engineering, his voice calm against the visual storm. "Rourke, we have a visual on the tide. It is converging. Estimate your time." In the algae-lit gloom, Rourke wiped sweat from his brow, his eyes never leaving the delicate web of wiring. The final sequence is the cascade initiator. It is a manual trigger, Captain, a physical switch. Once I close this circuit, the drive will begin drawing every last joule from the main reactor. We will have approximately 90 seconds of power buildup before the containment field collapses and the singularity forms. He paused, his hand hovering over a shielded lever. There will be no aborting, no turning back. The ship will go completely dark the moment I throw it. We will be in free fall, in the silence, waiting for the end we engineered. The choice was now binary, a switch in every sense of the word. They could wait to be consumed by the approaching tide of darkness, or they could choose the moment of their own annihilation, transforming it into a spark meant to outshine them all. The engineering bay felt like the still, silent eye of a storm, where the only sound was the soft, desperate breathing of the crew and the faint, hungry swirl of the void pressing in from every side. The lever felt colder than the void outside. Rourke's hand rested on it, a statue in the green algae light, when a soft chime echoed through the dead quiet ship. It came from the external airlock sensor, a system running on its own dying battery. On the bridge monitor, a shape resolved in the murk outside the main hatch. It was the Custodian, its form less defined now, shimmering like heat haze over a dark road. It did not request entry. It simply flowed through the hull's outer seal as if the metal were a suggestion, materializing inside the airlock chamber, a pool of living shadow in their red-lit world. The chorus voice filled the corridor, not through speakers but in their minds. Your sacrifice is pure but crude. A burst in the dark may fail to reach the heart before the tide consumes it. The being's star-mote eyes fixed on Thorne. We can be the conduit. We can guide your final light along the old pathways, direct it into the fracture with precision. The efficiency would increase tenfold. A surge of desperate hope flared in Thorne's chest, but it was instantly tempered. The Custodian continued, its tone shifting to one of profound, aching need. But to hold form in the presence of such energy, to not be scattered by its passage, we require ballast, a memory, a moment of pure personal light. It extended a hand, not of water, but of condensed twilight. Each of you must give one, a memory where you felt most alive, most luminous. We will carry its essence like a shield. In return, we offer your light a purpose, not just an end. The silence that followed was deeper than any before. This was not physics, this was alchemy. They were being asked to pay not with their lives, but with the very moments that made those lives worth living. Engineer Rourke was the first to step forward, his face grim. He closed his eyes. I remember the first time I saw a quantum drive ignite from the inside of a service pod, he whispered. Not on a screen, not in a simulation. The raw, blue-white cascade of creation folding space itself. It was terrifying. It was beautiful. I knew in that second what I was meant to do. As he spoke, a faint, shimmering wisp of silver light, like captured starlight, seemed to peel from his temple. The Custodian inhaled it, and for a moment its form solidified, gleaming with a hard, metallic sheen. Rourke staggered, as if a vital piece of his inner scaffolding had been removed. The memory was gone, not forgotten, but emptied of its feeling, its warmth, leaving only the cold facts behind. Navigator Cale went next, his earlier panic replaced by a hollow resolve. The desert at night on Proxima 3, he said, his voice thin. The sky was so clear you could see the galactic core like a river of diamonds. I was alone, and for the first time I did not feel small. I felt connected, a thread in a vast, beautiful tapestry. A soft, gold-tinged wisp drifted from him. The Custodian absorbed it, and its form gained a subtle, cosmic shimmer. Cale's shoulders slumped, the profound peace of that memory now just a story he could tell but never feel again. One by one they came. The medic gave the memory of her daughter's first genuine laugh after a long illness, a sound that had filled a sterile room with sun. The comms officer gave the silent understanding in a loved one's eyes across a crowded room. Each donation left the crew member visibly dimmer, a little more ghostly, as if they were fading from the inside out. Finally, Captain Thorne approached. He thought of 1,000 command moments of victories and narrow escapes, but they felt like duty, not light. Then it came to him. Not a moment of triumph, but of quiet certainty. He was 12, repairing a broken solar charger on his family's homestead during a dust storm. His hands were filthy, his back ached, but when the connector snapped into place and the tiny indicator glowed a steady green in the gathering dark, he knew with absolute clarity that he could fix things. He could make broken systems work. He offered the memory the feel of gritty plastic, the smell of ozone, the stubborn, defiant green light. A simple emerald wisp left him. The Custodian absorbed it, and its form finally achieved a solid, resonant stability, a figure woven from stolen starlight, desert nights, laughter, and the quiet glow of a repaired circuit. "We are ready," it intoned, its voice now rich with the echoes of their stolen light. "The bargain is struck. Your light will not be wasted. It will be a song." The crew stood together in the eerie gloom, feeling hollowed out, their pasts ransacked to buy a future for a world that was not their own. They were no longer just a crew sacrificing their future. They were ghosts sacrificing their past. What remains of a person when you take away the moments that shone the brightest? The hollow silence was shattered by a roar that had no sound. It was a pressure wave of pure negation, a wall of darkness that hit the Luminous like a physical fist. The ship screamed. Metal shrieked as entire sections of the outer hull crumpled inward, not from impact, but from a sudden, violent absence that collapsed the structural integrity fields. Emergency klaxons, starved of power, emitted a sickly, dying wail. On the bridge, the main viewer showed nothing because the external sensors had just been devoured. Captain Thorne was thrown against his console, the taste of copper filling his mouth. He grabbed the command channel, his voice a raw command cutting through the chaos. "All hands brace, seal the bulkheads." He could hear the terrible groans of the ship's skeleton, the hiss of atmosphere screaming into the void. They were being unmade from the outside in. He shouted the only order that mattered now. "Engineering, we initiate the sequence in 5 minutes or we are all consumed." In the algae-lit engineering bay, the world dissolved into nightmare. The walls themselves seemed to bleed shadow. Through fresh cracks in the reinforced plating, not water, but a viscous, black energy seeped inward. It moved like liquid smoke, forming tendrils that quested blindly, drawn to the faint green glow of their work lights and the stronger, desperate hum of the quantum drive's priming cycle. Where it touched, light died. A tool left on a console vanished into a patch of perfect black. A bioluminescent algae pod was snuffed out, leaving a cold, dark stain. The tide was inside the ship. Engineer Rourke stood before the final lever, the Custodian a solid figure of borrowed light beside him. A black tendril lashed out, wrapping around Rourke's ankle. He cried out, not in pain, but in a soul-deep cold, a feeling of utter draining emptiness. The Custodian moved, a hand of shimmering starlight slicing through the dark tendril, which recoiled with a sizzling hiss. But more were coming, pouring through the cracks like ink into water. "We are out of minutes," Rourke gasped, his breath frosting in the suddenly freezing air. He looked at the Custodian, then at the terrified faces of his team, their own stolen memories glowing faintly within the being's form. "This is it." On the bridge, Thorne watched as the darkness seeped up through the deck grates, a rising flood of nothingness. Consoles flickered and died permanently. The last of the red emergency lights guttered out, plunging them into a blackness so complete it felt like being buried alive. In that final, silent dark, with the cold tendrils of the tide brushing against his boots, Thorne opened a ship-wide channel for the last time. His voice was calm, a single point of warmth in the infinite cold. Initiate the sequence, light the spark. The command was not an end, but a beginning written in the language of a dying breath. The final seconds were a silent, shared breath in the dark. Comms Officer Jin was already moving before the order left the captain's lips, his hands flying across his dead console's backup interface, a small, independent unit powered by its own failing cell. The quantum drive's whine was a rising scream in the bones of the ship, a vibration that promised annihilation. His task was simple and impossible: to compress 73 years of tragic data, their own harrowing logs, and the biological schematics of a world into a single, tight beam of information, and fire it into the void before the expanding singularity shredded local spacetime. His fingers trembled not from fear, but from the cold leaching up from the deck, the same cold that was crystallizing the air in his lungs. The transmission protocol was a one-way shout, a scream into a cosmic canyon. It would drain the last of his console's power, and in doing so, sever the hardline connection to the rest of the ship, automatically sealing the reinforced comms room blast door. He knew the sequence. He had written the safety protocol himself. To send the message was to lock himself in a tomb. On the main channel, he heard the calm, final chatter of his crew, their voices thin with resolve and the unnatural cold. He opened a private line to Captain Thorne, his words rushed but clear. "The data burst is ready, targeting the nearest deep space relay. It will make it." "Sir, tell my sister," he began, then stopped. There was no time for sentiment, and in this final calculus, personal messages were a weight the transmission could not bear. He deleted the personal attachment with a swift, practiced tap. Instead, he typed a final line, a tag for the data, an epitaph for a mission. His voice was steady as he read it aloud to the captain, the words a quiet counterpoint to the ship's death rattle. "Tell them we found a world that forgot the sun. Tell them we reminded it." He took a deep, final breath of air that was already growing thin. "Initiate transmission in 3, 2, 1. His thumb pressed the final key. A brilliant, coherent spike of energy lanced out from the Luminous, a needle of information punching through the swirling tide, carrying the last testament of a dead colony and a doomed crew into the infinite dark. At that exact moment, the blast door to the comms room slammed down with a final, hydraulic shriek, sealing Jin in absolute darkness. The console before him died, its last jewel spent on that shout into the future. Outside the thick window, he saw the engineering bay vanish in a silent, expanding blossom of blue-white light, the birth scream of an artificial star. He did not close his eyes. He watched the light come, and in the last microsecond of his existence, Comms Officer Jin bore witness to the dawn they had purchased, a silent observer to the universe remembering how to shine. The quantum drive scream became the only sound in the universe, a rising, metallic shriek that vibrated through the marrow of their bones. In the shuddering engine room, now lit only by the Custodians' borrowed glow, and the angry crimson warnings flashing across the master console, Rourke and Thorne worked side by side. Their movements were a grim, synchronized dance, Rourke's hands steady as granite through the final series of physical breakers, rerouting the main reactor's entire output into the drive's containment chamber. The ship groaned in protest, a deep, resonant ache as its lifeblood was forcibly drawn into one volatile organ. Thorne stood at the authorization panel, his fingers flying over the keypad, inputting the command codes that would bypass every last failsafe. Each keystroke was a deliberate, irreversible step into the abyss. Around them, the Custodians' form, now a solid lattice of stolen memories and starlight, began to expand. It flowed through the walls of engineering not as a breach, but as a permeation, its essence weaving into the very fabric of the Luminous, preparing to channel the coming cataclysm along pathways only it could see. A final prompt flashed on the screen, demanding dual command confirmation. Rourke looked away from the console, meeting Thorne's eyes in the hellish red light. His face was smudged with grime and lit by a weary, almost peaceful acceptance. He managed a tight, grim smile. "Never thought I'd die making a star." Thorn held his gaze, the screams of the ship and the hungry silence of the tide outside narrowing to this single human point. He gave a slow, firm nod, better than dying in the dark. Together, they placed their hands on the biometric scanners. The system chimed, a deceptively gentle sound. Authorization confirmed, ignition sequence armed. A digital countdown materialized on every remaining screen, its bold, white numbers a cold, mechanical heartbeat. T-minus 90 seconds, the Custodian's voice filled the space around them, no longer a chorus, but a unified, resonant tone thrumming through the deck plates. "We are the conduit, your light will sing." As the number ticked down to 89, the entire structure of the Luminous seemed to inhale, drawing in the last dregs of its power, focusing it into a single, building point of impossible energy. They had lit the fuse, now they would become the explosion. 90 seconds became the longest moment of their lives. The countdown was a silent, digital metronome in their minds, each tick a hammer blow against the hull of their reality. The quantum drive did not explode, it transcended. As the final number bled to zero, the Custodian's form, woven from their stolen memories, ignited from within. It became a living lens, a funnel of sentient starlight. The raw, annihilating power of the artificial singularity was not released but captured, focused, and transformed. A beam of pure, white gold energy, thinner than a needle and brighter than 1,000 suns, erupted from the heart of the Luminous. It did not scorch or vaporize. It pierced the abyssal dark with surgical precision. A lance of creation fired directly down the path the Custodian had prepared, straight toward the fractured heart of the world. From the viewports of the dying ship, the crew watched breathless. The beam cut through the swirling tide like a blade through smoke, the hungry darkness recoiling from its unbearable purity. It crossed the kilometers of ocean in an instant, a divine stitch sewing the sky to the seabed. It struck the central crystal spire. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then a web of light raced across the obsidian surface, tracing the old, jagged fracture. The crystal groaned, a sound felt in the soul, not the ears. It did not heal, it shattered further, splintering into a million glittering fragments held together only by the beam's relentless energy. This was not the gentle rekindling they had hoped for. It was a catastrophic overload. Then came the flash. It was silent, and in that silence it was all the more devastating. A sphere of absolute white light bloomed from the heart, expanding faster than thought. It washed over the organic city, and for the first time in centuries, every tower, every arch, every coiled street was illuminated in stark, unforgiving detail. It was not the warm, sleeping purple glow of memory, but the sterile, brilliant light of a surgical theater, exposing a patient long thought dead. The sight was breathtaking and horrifying. The city was not just dormant, it was mummified, a fossil of a civilization preserved in eternal midnight. The flash burned their retinas, etching the image of the awakened necropolis into their minds. It was a false dawn, a beautiful, annihilating lie. The light did not bring warmth, it brought revelation, and the revelation was that some things, once broken, cannot be fixed, only seen clearly in their ruin. What do you do when your great sacrifice only serves to illuminate the scale of the catastrophe? The blinding flash receded like a wave pulling back from the shore. In its place, something new began, a pulse. A slow, deep, rhythmic throb of light emanated from the shattered heart. It was not the sterile white of the explosion, but a rich, living indigo, a color that seemed to vibrate with sound. With each beat, the light traveled. It raced along the ancient, dormant pathways of the Umbral Cord, a network suddenly visible as veins of brilliant blue fire igniting across the ocean floor. The pulse reached the organic city. Where the false dawn had exposed a fossil, this living light brought resurrection. The spiraling towers of chitin glowed from within, shimmering with intricate patterns of sapphire and emerald. The kelp arches blazed like bioluminescent rainbows. The entire necropolis was transforming into a living cathedral of light, its structures humming with reactivated energy. Around them, the oppressive, viscous blackness of the water itself began to change. It clarified, thinning from a hungry syrup into a crystal-clear, deep violet azure. The swirling vortex of the dark tide dissipated, its constituent creatures slowing, their forms shifting. The monstrous, pale shapes that had fled their lights now moved with a graceful, purposeful drift, their bodies developing delicate, internal patterns of soft gold and green. They were no longer hunters, they were citizens returning to their daily rhythms in a world suddenly made whole. Inside the shattered husk of the Luminous, on a bridge lit only by the reflected glow of a planet coming back to life, Ilara Vance pressed her hand against the cold viewport. Her breath fogged the glass, and through it she watched an entire ecosystem remember itself. Her voice was a whisper of pure, unadulterated awe, carrying the weight of their impossible gamble. It is alive, the whole world is waking up. They had not just reignited a crystal, they had jump-started a planetary heartbeat, and with every pulse of light through the Umbral Cord, they could feel the deep, resonant song of a world no longer starving but thriving. The light was a gentle, constant pressure against the hull, a soft indigo glow that filled the bridge. The terrible groaning had ceased. The ship was silent, but not with the hungry silence of the void. It was the deep, peaceful quiet of something finally at rest. Captain Thorne took a slow, shuddering breath. The air was cold, but it was still there. He checked his console. Every system was dark, drained to the last electron. The Luminous was dead, a hollow metal shell. Yet the hull around them held against the now clear, gentle pressure of the ocean. They were alive. They had survived the birth of a star. Navigator Kale floated near a viewport, his face illuminated by the serene, pulsing light from the city below. He did not turn as he spoke, his voice thick with a shame that had outlasted the darkness. We gave it a dawn. We gave a dead world a heartbeat. His hand rested against the cold glass. What do we do now? The question hung in the air, unanswered, because the answer seemed to be nothing. They were adrift in a paradise they had created, with no way to leave, no way to call for help, their home a tomb of expended miracles. Then the light in the room coalesced. It drew in from the corners, gathering like mist, and the Custodian reformed before them. But it was changed. Its form was no longer a shifting silhouette of borrowed memories, but a stable, humanoid shape of warm, golden light, its surface calm like a sunlit pond. The chorus of stolen voices was gone. In its place was a single, resonant tone, warm and deeply personal. You are the new Custodians. The being gestured slowly, one luminous hand indicating the dead ship around them, the other sweeping toward the vibrant, singing world beyond the viewport. Your ship is your tomb, a monument to the light that was spent, but your home is here. You have woven your essence into the Umbral Cord. You are part of the song now. The offer was not a request, but a statement of fact, as undeniable as the new light filtering through the water. They had not just saved this world, they had paid for their survival with the very memories that defined them. Their past was the currency, and this reborn ocean was the receipt. They were no longer visitors or even survivors. They were residents, the first and only human inhabitants of a world that remembered the sun because of them. The Custodian extended its hand, not to take but to guide. Outside, the water beckoned, clear and full of gentle, curious life. The choice was an illusion. They had nowhere else to go. Their great victory was also their final, bittersweet sentence, to live as ghosts in the garden they had grown from their own ashes. The first breath outside the ship was not of air but of light. It filled their lungs with a cool, electric clarity, a sensation more like drinking than breathing. The reinforced pressure suits were no longer necessary, the ocean's pressure now a gentle, supportive embrace. its chemistry subtly altered to match their own biology. Captain Thorn led them out of the main airlock, and they drifted into a world reborn. The monstrous leviathans they had once feared now moved past them with a serene, intelligent grace, their bodies swirling with intricate, friendly patterns of amber and teal. One vast creature, like a living constellation, paused beside them, and from its side a school of tiny, luminous fish emerged, swirling around the crew in a playful, welcoming dance before darting back to their host. The energy here was no longer something to be hoarded or stolen. It was offered. A soft, ambient warmth radiated from the very water, and a gentle, omnipresent glow illuminated everything, eliminating all shadows. They had not just survived in this world, they were being invited into its ecosystem. Their first journey was a pilgrimage back to the source. They swam with an effortless grace granted by the water itself toward the central spire of the organic city. The heart of Abyssus was no longer a fractured, dark crystal. It pulsed at the city's core like a brilliant, multifaceted sun, its light a harmonious blend of every color they had seen, conducting the planet's new song. And there, arranged in a silent circle around its base, were figures, dozens of them, humanoid shapes of solidified, gentle light, their forms echoing the familiar cut of environmental suits from a bygone era. The crew of the Aegir, they were not corpses, they were monuments made of memory and will. As Thorn and his people approached, one of the figures turned its head, its face a calm, featureless plane of soft gold. A voice, familiar yet profoundly different, spoke directly into their minds. It was the voice from the distress signal, stripped of desperation, filled with a weary, eternal peace. You completed the circuit. The truth unfolded not as a shock, but as a quiet, devastating clarity. The colonists had not been consumed by the dark tide. When they severed their reactor's link to stop the parasitic drain, their final collective act of will was not to die, but to change. They had offered their own consciousnesses, their memories, their personalities, their very essence as the initial ballast, the first sacrifice to stabilize the failing Umbral Cord. They became the original custodians, merging with the planet's neural network to form a guiding intelligence, a fail-safe to prevent another catastrophe. They had spent decades in that twilight state, maintaining a fragile equilibrium, using the last of their combined mental energy to broadcast that looping signal into the void. It was never a cry for someone to save them. It was a beacon for someone capable enough and desperate enough to bring the final, catastrophic spark they could not. Standing before these serene, luminous ghosts, Captain Thorn understood the full, terrible weight of their mission. His own voice was a whisper in the water, a realization spoken aloud that echoed the final piece of the puzzle. They were not calling for rescue, they were calling for someone to finish the job, and now the job was done. The Aegir's crew, their purpose fulfilled, began to slowly fade, their light dissipating and flowing back into the pulsing heart, their long vigil finally over. In their place, a new connection hummed to life within the minds of Thorn and his crew. They felt it as a gentle pull, an awareness of the city around them, of the life in the waters, of the slow, steady pulse of the planet itself. They could sense a damaged conduit here, a thriving nursery of new bioluminescent flora there. The Umbral Cord was not just a power grid, it was a sensory organ, and they were now part of its nervous system. The original Custodians' words had been literal. They were the new stewards. Their home was a metal tomb suspended in a sea of light, and their duty was to tend the garden that had grown from their sacrifice. They had traded a starship for a world, and their humanity for a legacy written in eternal, gentle dawn. What is a person, after all, but the story they leave behind in the light? The wreck of the Luminous became their workshop, with the ocean providing sustenance and the ambient light eliminating all shadows. The crew turned their attention upward. The sky remained a featureless, oppressive ceiling of perpetual cloud, a final barrier between this reborn world and the cosmos. Using salvaged components from non-essential systems, power conduits, reflector panels, even the polished casing from the ship's long-dead navigation beacon. They began a new construction on the hull. Engineer Rourke, his hands remembering their purpose, led the work. It was not a transmitter, not a distress call. It was a simple, powerful light, a beacon designed to project a column of stable, unwavering illumination straight up into the gloom. It ran on a trickle of geothermal energy tapped from the seabed, a gift from the planet itself, completing a new kind of circuit. They were giving back the light they had been given. For days, the beam was swallowed by the clouds, a brilliant spear vanishing into grey wool. Then, one morning, Ilara noticed a change. The oppressive ceiling seemed softer, less dense. A subtle, pearlescent quality shimmered where the beacon's light struck. Days more passed, and the clouds began to fray at the edges, revealing hints of a deeper, darker blue beyond. The atmosphere itself was healing, the violent weather patterns of a starved world calming into gentle currents. Then it happened. They were gathered on the outer hull, as had become their custom, when a crack appeared in the cloud cover. Not a storm crack, but a clean, widening rift, and through it, for the first time since their descent, genuine starlight poured. But it was not the faint, cold pinpricks they remembered. This light was a soft, diffuse, golden glow, refracted and scattered by the high atmosphere, painting the cloud edges in hues of rose and amber. It was not the harsh white of their home star. This light was older, kinder, a gentle warmth that kissed their faces and made the entire ocean glitter as if sprinkled with diamond dust. Ilara Vance stood perfectly still, tears tracing clean lines down her cheeks. She did not look away from the sky as she whispered, her voice carrying a reverence that silenced the world around her. "It is not our sun, but it is a sun." In that moment, the meaning of their sacrifice shifted once more. They had not restored a dead star. They had healed a world so completely that it could finally see the light that had always been there, waiting beyond the self-made storm. The first sunrise on Abyssus was not a dawn of fire, but a dawn of clarity, a silent testament that some endings are just the universe catching its breath before a new, more beautiful song begins. The golden light from above was not an end, but a beginning. With the clouds parting and the ocean thriving, the crew of the Luminous faced their final, most human choice. They could spend their lives trying to signal for a rescue, to return to a universe that had moved on without them, or they could embrace the purpose they had been handed. The vote was unanimous. They would stay. The wreck of their ship would not be a tomb, but a foundation. They began the careful work of converting the Luminous into the first human research outpost on Abyssus, a station they named Vigil. Its mission was not extraction, but guardianship. They would study the Umbral Cord, not to harness it, but to understand its delicate symphony, to learn the language of this world's light so they could help protect its fragile, newborn balance. Engineer Rourke, with a quiet smile, repurposed the ship's long-range comms array, but he did not aim it at the stars. He connected it to the planet's own neural network, the very system that had once broadcast the distress call. Now they could use it to send a message of their own. The transmission was simple, a data packet containing their entire log, the Aegir's findings, and a stark warning about the dangers of invasive energy signatures. It concluded with a set of precise, safe coordinates and an open invitation for any peaceful scientific vessel that wished to study this miracle, with the explicit condition that they follow the protocols established by Outpost Vigil. They were not hiding their discovery. They were curating it, placing a guidepost at the edge of the abyss that read, "Proceed with reverence." On the first anniversary of their arrival, Captain Thorne stood in the clear water outside the outpost, the gentle planetary pulse a rhythm in his blood. He activated a personal recorder, its power cell fed by a single, glowing tendril of kelp. He did not speak of heroism or loss. He spoke of a simple, hard-won truth. His voice was calm, etched with the memory of darkness and the warmth of the new dawn. "This is Captain Aris Thorne of the starship Luminous, now of Outpost Vigil. Abyssus is no longer a world with no light. It is a world that remembers what light costs and what it gives. We are here to help it remember." The message ended and he released the recorder. It did not sink. It drifted upward, caught in a gentle current that carried it toward the shimmering surface, a single seed of a story planted in a sea of light, waiting for the day another listener might arrive, ready to understand the price of a dawn. The water around Outpost Vigil held a new kind of silence, one filled with purpose rather than absence. Ilara Vance was on a routine survey dive, charting the growth patterns of a newly awakened bioluminescent reef. Her instruments hummed softly, tuned to the gentle frequencies of the Umbral Cord. As she reached out to adjust a sensor, a figure detached itself from the shimmering coral wall ahead. It was a custodian, its form the familiar, stable gold of their guides, but as it turned, Ilara's breath caught in her throat. The light sculpted a face. It was Jin. His features were serene, detailed not with hard lines, but with the soft, flowing contours of captured sunlight, and he was smiling a peaceful, knowing smile that she remembered from 100 quiet moments on the bridge. No shock of horror came, only a profound, heart-stopping stillness. The being that was and was not Jin drifted closer. It did not speak aloud, but its communication blossomed directly in her mind, a thought voice that was unmistakably his, yet layered with the deep, resonant hum of the planet itself. "The light is continuous," it whispered. "I am not gone. I am the memory of the burst, forever cycling." In that instant, Ilara understood with a clarity that bypassed logic. When the quantum drive had detonated, creating that micro-singularity, the energy was not the only thing channeled through the Custodians. The final, focused consciousness of the crew in that moment, their acceptance, their resolve, the very essence of their sacrifice had been imprinted onto the energy surge itself. That imprint did not vanish. It was woven into the revitalized Umbral Cord, a permanent echo in the world's new song. Jin, Rurk, the medic, all of them who had stood in engineering, they were not ghosts haunting a paradise. They were memories made manifest, patterns of intent and identity preserved within the planet's living neural network, cycling through the system like a cherished refrain. It was a truth both deeply comforting and quietly haunting. They were here, a part of the dawn they had created, eternal witnesses to the world's healing. Yet they were also a reminder of the ultimate price, their humanity transformed into something beautiful, alien, and forever beyond reach. Ilara reached out a hand, and the Jin custodian mirrored the gesture, its light warmth brushing against her glove. It was a connection, but it was also a farewell, finally understood. The crew had not just saved a world. In the most literal sense, they had become part of its soul, their greatest sacrifice leaving an indelible signature on the very fabric of reality. What does immortality look like when it is woven from a single, selfless act? The beacon's gentle pulse had become the heartbeat of their new home. 1 year to the day after the first golden light pierced the clouds, a different kind of light appeared in the cleared sky above Abyssus. It was a sharp, metallic glint descending in a controlled burn through the atmosphere. A ship. The transmission that crackled across their modified comms was all business, a standard deep-range survey vessel, the Curiosity, hailing the unidentified outpost. They had followed the open invitation in the data packet. They were here. Captain Thorne felt a familiar tension, a ghost of old instincts, but it was tempered now by a deeper understanding. He did not greet them from the outpost. He took one of the bioengineered submersibles, a vessel grown from resilient local flora and powered by the ambient energy of the cord, and rose to meet them at the ocean's shimmering surface. The Curiosity's shuttle settled on a temporary platform they had grown from buoyant kelp, its engines a harsh, grating roar against the world's soft hum. As the hatch opened, Thorne stepped forward. He wore no environmental suit, only simple garments, the clear, supportive water of Abyssus lapping at his waist. The survey team leader, a woman named Captain Voss, stared at him, then at the vibrant, glowing sea, her face a mask of professional astonishment. Before she could speak, Thorne raised a hand. His voice carried not as a command but as a statement of natural law, calm and unwavering. Approach with respect. Your light is a gift, not a tool. He saw the confusion in her eyes, the scientist's mind already cataloging, assessing, planning to extract samples. So he showed her. He invited her team under strict guidance to witness the heart. They descended in the submersible, and as the city of light unfolded around them, as the custodians of memory drifted past, the sheer, living scale of what they were seeing stripped away their clinical detachment. In the chamber of the pulsing heart, Thorne explained the treaty. It was non-negotiable. Any vessel wishing to establish contact, to study or to visit, must first make an offering. Not of technology, not of resources, but of meaning. Each visitor, before setting foot on the world, must journey to the heart and donate one memory. A single personal moment of pure, luminous joy or peace or love. The memory would be taken, its emotional essence absorbed to strengthen the cord, a direct infusion of conscious light into the system. In return, the planet would recognize them, its environment would support them, and the predatory hunger of the old tide would remain a forgotten dream. It was a psychic airlock, ensuring that only those who understood the value of light could enter. Captain Voss, humbled and deeply moved, was the first. She offered the memory of her child's first steps on the soil of Mars, the triumphant, wobbly joy under a dome of simulated sky. As the silvery wisp left her, drawn into the heart, she did not feel lost. She felt a profound connection, as if she had just introduced her daughter to a new, gentle universe. The treaty was signed not on paper, but in light, a new protocol born from the ashes of the old. The visitors could stay, could learn, but they would do so as guests in a living cathedral, their presence making it stronger, not risking its collapse. The beacon's call had been answered, and the first rule of this new world was forever established. You must give of your own light before you can share in its glow. The memory garden began as a simple experiment in biostability, a way to ground the abstract concept of the treaty in something tangible. Ilara found that the bioluminescent flora, when exposed to the specific emotional resonance of a donated memory, would not just glow but grow. It would shape itself, taking on forms and hues that echoed the essence of the memory itself. The crew dedicated a broad, sandy plain near Outpost Vigil to the purpose, and it became their most profound work. Visitors would come, offer their luminous moment to the heart, and then plant a spore from a neutral grey creeper into the garden soil. Within days, a new, unique life would emerge. A memory of a first love might sprout as a cluster of delicate, pulsing flowers in deep burgundy and soft pink. A memory of profound academic discovery could manifest as a geometric lattice of fungi that emitted a steady, intelligent blue light. Navigator Kale spent hours each day tending to his own plot. The spore he had planted, infused with his donated memory of the Proxima 3 desert night, did not grow into something that mirrored the darkness. Instead, it blossomed into a wide, low shrub whose leaves were the color of a deep twilight blue, and from its center rose a single, graceful stalk. At the apex of that stalk, every morning at the precise moment the golden light first touched the clouds above, a bloom would unfold. It was a perfect, radiant replica of a sunrise, casting warm amber and rose gold light in a gentle sphere. Kale would sit beside it, the artificial desert dawn warming his face, and for the first time since the panic in the Luminous's corridors, he felt a quiet, unshakable peace. The memory was gone from his mind, but here it was, given back to the world in a form more beautiful than he could have ever held inside himself. Engineer Rourke, meanwhile, had traded schematics for symbiosis. He studied the garden not for its beauty, but for its efficiency. He charted how the memory plants shared nutrients through interconnected root systems, how they tuned their light emissions to avoid wasteful overlap, creating a harmonious, low-energy ecosystem that thrived on cooperation rather than competition. His new designs for Outpost Vigil systems were no longer about brute force generation, but about elegant integration. He built heat exchangers that mimicked the thermal regulation of the leviathans and light collectors that worked like the photosensitive corals, absorbing and diffusing the ambient glow without draining it. Standing at the edge of the thriving garden, a data slate in his hand displaying a new energy grid that pulsed in time with the planet's own rhythm, he made a simple observation to Thorn. His voice held the satisfaction of a problem finally solved, not with a wrench but with understanding. We did not just save a world, we learned how to live with it. The statement was the final, quiet answer to the desperate question that had brought them here. Survival was not about dominance or escape, but about finding your note in a larger, older song and learning to sing it with care. The planetary alignments were a celestial clockwork the crew had only theorized. Then the Umbral Cord began to sing. It started as a deep, subsonic vibration through the water, a hum that resonated in their bones long before their instruments detected the subtle gravitational shifts. The distant stars, invisible to their eyes, were pulling on the fabric of space-time, and the living network of Abyssus was tuning itself to the cosmic tide. The soft, ambient glow that illuminated their days intensified, brightening from a gentle indigo to a brilliant electric sapphire. Veins of light across the ocean floor pulsed like exposed nerves, and the heart at the city's center beat with a slow, majestic rhythm that shook the very bedrock. It was not a crisis but a crescendo. The Custodians gathered at Outpost Vigil, their forms blazing with an inner light that mirrored the world's awakening. Their chorus voice, when it came, was filled with a quiet, triumphant awe. The alignment is complete, the circuit is whole. They directed the crew's attention to the heart, not as a singular object, but as the nexus of a new stellar process. The trauma of the fracture is healed. The heart no longer merely distributes energy. It has learned to synthesize it. They explained that the immense gravitational focus of the alignment had acted as a final catalyst, stabilizing the quantum resonance within the crystal into a perpetual, slow fusion. The heart was now a gentle, self-sustaining star in its own right, a well of light so deep and stable it would burn for 10,000 years without fading. The dark tide was not defeated, it was rendered obsolete, its hunger forever satisfied by this endless internal dawn. On the observation platform grown from the hull of the old Luminous, Captain Thorn stood with the family he had forged in the dark. Ilara, Kale, Rurk, and the others watched as the planet celebrated. Luminous waves, not of water but of pure, condensed energy, began to roll across the global ocean. They were visible from orbit, great shimmering rings of gold and violet expanding from the heart, traveling across the world to touch every shore, every trench, every living thing. It was the Umbral Cord's first heartbeat as a mature, independent being. Thorn looked at the faces beside him, illuminated by the passing wave, each one marked by loss, by sacrifice, and by a hard-won peace no one back home could ever understand. He did not raise his voice, he simply spoke into the radiant silence, his words for them alone, yet echoing the truth of the world itself. We are the keepers of the flame. Our story is now part of the tide. As the luminous wave washed over them, they felt it, a gentle integration. The echo of their memories in the cord, the physical reality of their garden, the very air in their lungs, it was all one continuous flow. They had not just witnessed a cosmic event, they had become a footnote in the geology of a star, their brief, brilliant struggle now woven into the eternal rhythm of a world that would outlive empires, outlast species, and glow softly long after their names were dust. What is a legacy if not the light you leave behind, pulsing in the deep long after you are gone? Time, in a world of gentle pulses, is measured not in years but in generations of light. The outpost of Vigil did not remain a lonely station. It became a seed. Over the decades it grew, its structures no longer salvaged metal but living architecture grown from the responsive coral and chitin of the seafloor, fused with the elegant, efficient designs born of human ingenuity. What began as a refuge blossomed into a city, a submerged metropolis of spiraling towers and glowing plazas, connected by soft-lit tunnels where beings of water and memory drifted alongside their human neighbors. They named it New Luminous, a testament to the ship that was its cradle and the principle that was its soul. It became a beacon not of distress but of a quiet, revolutionary idea, a permanent embassy between humanity and a living, conscious world. In the highest chamber of the central spire, grown around the original hull of the Luminous like a protective shell, an old man sat by a wide, crystal viewport. Captain Aris Thorne's hands, once steady on a starship's controls, now rested calmly in his lap, tracing the patterns of light that danced on the water outside. The ocean was no longer a deep violet mystery, but a sun-dappled azure, the golden light from above filtering down to mingle with the rich, internal glow from below. It was a world of two suns, one distant and kind, one near and nurturing. A young visitor, a child of the new generation born to the sea, once asked him a question that had become folklore. The old captain's final log entry, recorded that day, would become the city's founding creed. His voice, weathered but serene, plays now over the scene of the vibrant, thriving world he helped create. They asked if I missed the stars. He begins, the recording carrying the soft hum of the city around him. I tell them I live inside one. We look up and see only a golden haze, but we are not beneath the sky. We are within a greater body. Every pulse of light through these streets, every breath of this water, is a photon born in the heart's gentle fusion. We are not observers of a star's light, we are citizens within its radiant sphere. The ocean world with no light was a myth we told ourselves out of fear. The truth we found is far stranger and far more beautiful. It just needed someone brave enough to strike the match and wise enough to tend the flame. The log ends not with a click, but with the sound of his soft, contented breath, and then the ever-present background music of this world, the gentle, eternal pulse of the planetary heart. It is a sound felt more than heard, a deep, resonant bass line to the symphony of life in New Luminous. It is the testament. It is the proof of a sacrifice that was not an ending, but a transplant, a fragile spark carefully moved from one kind of vessel to another, infinitely larger one. It is the rhythm of renewal playing on forever in the deep, luminous blue.